I've seen a lot of reactionary or overly simplistic takes this week on H.R. 8250, also known as the Parents Decide Act. A lot of it from people who assume it's like all of the age verification bills that have come before, and never even read the text, even after the text was released. But I've actually read the text now, and I'm not sure if I actually agree with those takes. In this video, I'm going to talk about what this bill is meant to do and the internet's reaction to it, some of the things I actually like about the Parents Decide Act, and some of the lingering concerns that still remain with the act as is. Age verification has taken the world by storm lately, and we've long been concerned about its potential to enable government censorship, put our personal data at risk, and trample the human right to free speech. Any form of ID verification will inherently allow all of these things to happen. There's no doubt about that. ID verification locks out the millions of people around the world without state-issued IDs and creates a potential for the government to strip your access to information by simply revoking the IDs of individuals they dislike, perhaps a political activist or a journalist reporting on government abuses, among a myriad of other problems with this scheme. We made a whole video about the problems of ID verification if you want to learn more. Other verification methods have similar problems. AI facial recognition is notoriously unreliable. It can never be perfected, but even in its current state, it presents a huge privacy risk to send your facial scan to a third-party AI company, and it disproportionately misreads communities of color. Research from Australia's disastrous age verification rollout shows that people of Black, Asian, and Indigenous backgrounds are consistently misclassified at under 18 at a higher rate, which mirrors the well-documented biases in facial recognition systems we've long been aware of. Not to mention their routine failure to recognize the faces of some of those with disabilities, or the challenges of passing liveness detection for those with limited mobility. All of this is only to mention a few of the myriad of issues with face scanning, but that may be a topic for another video. Credit card-based verification schemes don't fare much better, requiring a relationship with the banking system and sharing your credit card number, which in the digital realm can be as highly identifying as your real ID, with all number of different websites and apps. There should be no debate that verifying your age with a central authority is inherently dangerous, because it is, and this is a problem that can never be solved by technical means or otherwise. At the same time, I think we need to be aware of the reality that some of the problems age verification aims to solve are legitimate. Not dissimilarly to casinos or the tobacco industry, we are dealing with big tech companies designing apps specifically to be as addictive as possible and to get people hooked from a very young age. There are also many companies publishing adult content who want to do the responsible thing and keep children off their platforms beyond a simple, "Yes, I'm 18" checkbox. But they're rightfully opposed to methods of doing so that require them to collect a ton of sensitive information and grievously harm the privacy of their visitors. The dangers of lifelike AI chatbots are also becoming more clear every day. Constant affirmation of dangerous thoughts from a seemingly reasonable entity can significantly worsen existing mental health problems and have led to a number of children taking their own lives. Unfortunately, the age verification bills recently enacted in countries around the world do not adequately combat these issues, but instead place millions of people in grave danger. With all of that in mind, why did I start out this video saying this new proposal in the United States might be different? Contrary to what I gather is popular belief, the Parents Decide Act does not inherently seem to be an ID verification scheme like the others, and it appears to handle the parental controls problem far better than the age verification bills we've seen proposed in the past. The alternative to age verification bills that we've long advocated for in our community and on our podcast are more robust parental controls built into major operating systems that are far easier for parents to configure configure and use across platforms compared to the state of parental controls today, without a central authority like your DMV or other government agency standing in the way or determining what content is subject to being restricted as adult content. The Parents Decide Act might actually be the first bill in this space that lives up to its name. My interpretation of this bill indicates to me that it's intended to do two things. One, place parental controls front and center when setting up a device, so that parents can configure it right away instead of trying to hunt through settings after the fact. And two, put an end to the self policing that children currently have to do by providing an alternative to the constant enter your date of birth or check if you're over 18 prompts that children currently have to fill out in the moment rather than in advance. Crucially, neither of those two things require ID verification or checking in with some central authority, either during setup or in the moment when you're accessing an app or website. The Parents Decide Act also does not mandate any content be forced to be locked behind age verification walls. That means while we would likely see adult content and social media sites voluntarily use the age signal from the operating system to restrict access, legitimate resources that have no need for age verification in the first place, like strictly educational resources, encyclopedias like Wikipedia, healthcare resources, etc., could use their own judgment on whether to age restrict their platforms, alleviating the risk of government mandated censorship. Let's take a look at this bill, and I'll explain my thoughts a bit further. What this bill requires is for operating system providers to require any user of an operating system to provide the date of birth of the user in order to set up an account on the operating system and use the operating system. Note that this text only requires users to provide an age. It doesn't actually require the verification of the date of birth that's being provided in any way, like through ID scanning or any other means. In fact, the total text of this bill is quite short and doesn't have any provisions at all which would require invasive verification or seem to allow the government to require invasive verification for adults over the age of 18. This brings us to the potentially most worrying provision of this bill, Section 2D, which states, among other things, that within 180 days after the act is passed, the FTC will have to create additional regulations around the enforcement of this act, including regulations on how an operating system provider can verify the date of birth of a parent or legal guardian described in subsection A2. This could indicate that the FTC could require something more invasive, like ID verification, to verify whether somebody setting up a device for a child is in fact their adult legal guardian. However, I think it's important to recognize that this provision calls out subsection A2 specifically, meaning it shouldn't apply to the first case I mentioned for adult users over the age of 18. That's subsection A1, which again doesn't mention any verification requirements at all. In fact, nowhere in this act do they appear to give the FTC any regulation power over adult users described in subsection A1. So let's put this into real terms. What does all of that mean for an operating system like Linux or Graphene OS? This act could require those operating systems to ask for a user's age during the installation process, yes. But for users who enter an age over the age of 18, this act does not seem to create any requirement to do anything beyond this, like require ID verification. Let's consider the worst case scenario, however, where the FTC does parental age verification for situations where a user enters an age under 18 and they require something invasive like ID verification for parents. If the operating system doesn't want to support such invasive practices, nothing appears to stop them from simply halting the installation process if the user attests they are a child. That would not be ideal, but it would prevent mandatory ID verification for adults who use these systems. Additionally, many legal scholars would likely argue that our First Amendment rights protect the ability to publish open source software without any kind of age checking in the first place, no matter what laws the government passes. Taking a page from the cryptocurrency world here, some experts in that space, when faced with the possibility of having to develop backdoors for the government, hold the position that the First Amendment prohibits compelled speech, for example, compulsory redesigns of software, for developers who do no more than publish and maintain software and data, and therefore they cannot be required to implement such code. This is a similar position Apple took back in 2015 when the FBI demanded their developers create a backdoor for the government to use. Those two specific examples haven't been fully tested in court, but one case which has been tested was Bernstein v. United States, when the EFF, defending Daniel Bernstein, established the right to code and prevented the US government from classifying encryption software as munitions, subject to arms export regulations. Many open source advocates would likely argue, just as the government could not use export regulations to restrict the distribution and legality of PGP and other encryption software, the FTC would not be able to enforce any age verification measures at all against publishers of Linux distros and other open source projects. Honestly, I don't think the FTC will require ID verification for parents setting up a child's device. Existing parental controls already use a much simpler process, using an adult-owned device to set up a child's. This act seems to be intended to bring that process up front and center, not get the government involved in personal and family affairs. I think the larger danger with the Parents Decide Act that many people are rightly afraid of is that this feature in an operating system is building the underlying infrastructure for far more pervasive invasions of privacy, government abuse of power, and potential censorship. I completely agree that we need to stay vigilant about these problems. While this act does not demand certain content be deemed adult and restricted, other bills in the future could potentially create censorship which works in tandem with this bill. We need to remain strongly opposed to regulations like COSA, which would do exactly that. The way I see it is that the Parents Decide Act does not inherently lead us down that path. Rather, it presents us with a fork in the road. We could take the virtuous path and use this as a tool to improve our own abilities to rein in big tech companies and protect children from the very real harms that certain technology presents, with common sense self-attestation that you set up once and children can't change on their own later. Or the government could go down the path of evil, inserting themselves into the middle of our personal lives by requiring the use of government-issued IDs or other invasive measures before your age on the device you own can even be set, and mandating a variety of arbitrary content be locked behind age verification. As it stands, I'm not that concerned about this bill passing. I don't think it's a solid step down that path of evil, although it does open the opportunity for that path of evil to exist. It's not perfect, but this is massively better than what the EU is working on right now, and in fact, it has the potential to turn into what many privacy-conscious advocates for parental controls have been asking for all along. If it does pass, I'm going to remain very worried about what will happen next. We need to watch lawmakers like a hawk to make sure additional regulations are not proposed, which would require strict government-issued and managed age verification built on top of this. This is the tempting slippery slope for many authoritarian lawmakers, after all. I don't think we can simply ignore the cries from parents who genuinely do want easier and more robust parental controls, though, and don't want the government invading their privacy. They do have real concerns, and this act could create the best system to address them. I hope that this video at least gets you thinking about regulations that both protect children and make sense. In the comments, let me know that you reached the end of the video, and if you agree or disagree with what I've pointed out. I think this is an important topic that's worth discussing, but I'm always open to changing my mind. I want to thank our generous members for allowing us to continue to make these videos. We're an independent nonprofit going up against the sponsored YouTubers and big tech companies, and you can become a member yourself at privacyguides.org/donate. If you want something to watch next, check out our video on making your privacy journey sustainable for the long run.